This podcast talks candidly and openly about issues of male sexual violence. A full list of topics can be found in the episode description.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Silence, the official podcast of We Are Survivors. I'm your host, George, and I'm part of the community team here that runs activities for survivors in the community, as you might imagine. I have two wonderful guests with me here today, Mark and Jane. They are members of our therapy team. They're going to tell us a little bit about their crucial work providing therapy for survivors in our community. Now, as well, we, of course, will have our traditional spotlights throughout the episode. If you want to jump ahead, just look in the description. We've got timestamps, but I do thoroughly recommend that you stick with us for the entire journey. We'll be focusing firstly on getting to know Mark and Jane and their work and understanding the processes behind trauma-informed therapy. Then we'll be looking at the news and the new NHS budget. Finally, we'll be jumping on to the activity spotlight, which looks at our new group therapy initiative, and our letters segment, which is a chance for you to get in contact with us and tell us, what you think of us, or send in any questions you may have. Now, if you're sitting comfortably and you've got yourself a nice brew, let's get started. So we have a bit of a tour of the United Kingdom today, quite a diverse selection of accents. Firstly, I'll introduce Jane. Jane, you grew up in Wales, I believe.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, both of you, I think, have been therapists for about 5 or 6 years now, is my understanding.
Yeah, correct.
And in terms of your background, you focus more on person-centered therapy, which I believe is more about building up a kind of a resilience and sort of a strength of security coming from the self. But you also, apart from your work with trauma survivors, specialise in helping people work through romantic issues, but also their own identity issues surrounding race or identity in general. Whereas Mark, your sort of perspective, also that sort of 5-6 years, you've been a senior with the organisation, I think, for the past 3 years now. You've done some work in prisons with Outspoken, but your current sort of baby that's landed with you is your group therapy project, which I definitely want to ask you some more questions about later.
Okay.
And you also came from Scotland, so there was the tie-in at the start.
I was born in Edinburgh.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I'm from very much not from the United Kingdom, but let's just pretend I'm from England, and then we can, other than Ireland, we'll have the great union coming together here.
All the Celts coming together.
Yeah, something like that. Fantastic. So firstly, I want to kind of ask you, if I was wanting to come into the organisation for receiving therapy, what would my initial journey be like? What would sort of be my first steps?
There's loads of ways that you can kind of access us, whether that's through the telephone, so picking up the phone that's on our website, or through the website there's a form that you can fill in. And basically the referral form gathers some information about what's making you want to inquire and engage with our services. But a lot of the time we get people ringing up, I think, Mark, right? What would you say?
Yeah. People can pick up the phone and give us a call. Sometimes it's really just to kind of check us out and, have a conversation and then go away and then think about what their next step is. Sometimes it's picking up the phone because a partner has directed them towards an organisation or maybe another support service. And after a brief chat, they're ready to refer to the service. So we can do, if possible, it's great to do that in the moment and kind of capture them while you've got their attention.
Yeah.
It takes about 15-20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes to do an over-the-phone referral.
Yeah.
And then then they're with us, and then we go through to the next step. We'll book in an assessment.
And that's an assessment, which would be the same sort of situation, either in person or online, via the telephone usually.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's a bit more in-depth.
Yeah, that's more in-depth. So we give about an hour and a half for an assessment session. That's really understanding what's going on for you at the moment, kind of what's your support system looking like, what's happening in terms of kind of health, social network, kind of work, what's going on to really understand.
It's not an intrusive exploration of what their survivorship is, it's everything else.
It's everything else going on around you, so we can really understand where you're at in life right now, what support we can offer, whether that's going to be the therapy service, the ISVA service, or some of the community development team activities could be the right fit for what you need at that point in time.
So when I'm signing up to the organisation, I'm ticking that box at the bottom of the sheet, which most of our clients do, which says I want therapy.
Yeah.
What sort of therapeutic support do we have available?
So we have different pathways into therapy, but maybe it would be useful to talk about the kind of some of the guiding principles of how those pathways are structured.
Absolutely.
So as an organisation, we base a lot of the way we think about what a trauma-informed approach is on Judith Herman's work. So Judith Herman is a trauma-informed therapist, author, teaches trauma-informed approaches.
Yeah.
And she wrote a seminal book back in the 90s, I think, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but she set out a 3-phased approach to working with trauma. So phase 1 is stabilisation, creating a sense of safety. There'll be other ways to talk about this. Phase 2 is around remembering, storytelling, mourning. And then stage 3 is around resourcing, going back out into the community.
Yeah, reintegration.
And reintegration.
Yeah.
This is not a linear kind of process, but it can get set out in that way, but it's very much a kind of cyclical.
So you can go back from, if you're in stage 1, you might move into stage 2, but you might need a bit more stabilization.
Absolutely.
So you bounce back.
Because alongside the therapy that you're kind of getting when you're with the service, other life happens.
Yeah, of course.
Something else can happen. You could lose your job, or could fall out with a friend. So as much as you're doing the work around the trauma, sometimes other stuff comes in that kind of pushes you in and out of the stages.
Changes the resources you might have available. Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of our sort of stabilisation pathways, so we've got Judith Herman underpinning everything, but then in terms of the branching road when I'm looking for therapy, we've got 2 different kinds. We've got Break the Silence, which is, I've always described it as more of a sort of an in-depth journey, but you two are therapists, you might be able to describe it a bit better. We've also got Healing Steps, which feels like it's quite a good initial position for a lot of people, focused mostly on stabilisation. Is that your sort of findings, Jane?
Yeah, 100% definitely. So Healing Steps is a 12-session therapy process, and the focus really is that stabilisation bit. So it's the bit before maybe you're ready to really delve into talking about the trauma. So it's about, how do I stabilise what's going on in my life right now, whether that's working with anxieties, flashbacks, nightmares, sleep issues. It's really doing a lot of work around that. That prepares you to be ready for maybe the 20-step sessions of therapy that we have, which is Breaking the Silence. I don't know, that's how I'd describe it, Mark. I don't know what you would say as an approach.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Healing Steps is really about developing a sense of safety. If you don't have that kind of basic sense of feeling safe, or often in a state of emotional overwhelm, it's really hard to then process, if that's the right term, what's happened to you, the traumatic events. So creating that sense of safety, stabilisation, resourcing is an important. It's Judith Herman's phase 1. That's what's needed before you can start to talk about what happened to you. Whereas the phase 2 is more the breaking the silence, where there's more space to then everybody's different, to find a way to process what happened in a way that's helpful.
Yeah, so this is the main difference, I imagine, between trauma-informed therapy and traditional therapy, is that you need to do that sort of stabilisation and containing first. You can't just sort of open up and talk. Is that my understanding? Or
yeah, that would be correct. And people come to us at different points in their journey. So sometimes people come at that space, like Mark said, where it's, the emotions are overwhelming. It's about that stabilisation and how do we regulate emotions. But other people come and they're like, actually, I'm very ready to start going into what's happened. So they're ready to actually start breaking the silence. So the assessment process is really important for discovering that.
So you're gauging where they're at, and then you can tailor it to the individual. And then if you were going into a first session of therapy with someone, let's say maybe they've done Healing Steps, you've got an understanding of their stabilisation. What does the first session of Break the Silence really look like? Is it just an introduction? How do you sort of find where the client's at and kind of create a shared kind of working parameter?
It's a good question. I think for me, when I'm having that first session, I want to make sure that, or I want to find out what capacity they have already to support themselves, to deal with difficult feelings and emotions, what sense of safety they've already created for themselves, what kind of networks they have, what kind of tools they have in terms of being able to support themselves day to day, and get a sense of that before we do anything else.
Yeah. And from what I understand, you mentioned that you can kind of move between the sort of stages. We looked at the 3 stages earlier. People can kind of need to step backwards for a second. Is there a way that you can gauge whether or not a client maybe is unearthed quite a lot and needs to sort of pump the brakes a little bit? How do you sort of track that in your mind and find that moment to kind of step backwards?
I think you probably notice it session by session. I don't know if you'd agree, Mark. And I think that's a really good descriptor of the first session. Is really, it's a brand new relationship. It's the first time you might be meeting your therapist. You might have spoken on the phone or met them at the assessment. So really the first few sessions are about getting to know each other and really understanding what are you wanting to get out of this therapy journey that we're going on together, and understanding what kind of support they have around them and how we're going to get through it. But like you said, George, it's going to be, okay, we've unpacked a lot this session. We're on session 12 or maybe session 6 or session 17. It's understanding, okay, how do we contain that so you still feel supported?
Yeah, because we can track some of this through our questionnaires. So after certain sessions, there's milestones where we look in people's initial journey into the organisation when they're doing their assessment. We'll assess them. It's not a diagnosis, but we'll check them for symptoms of PTSD, anxiety and depression. And of course, after a session, if things are more flared up or for a long period of time, maybe you'd sort of spot something going on.
Yeah.
What about the other way around? When someone's really been engaging well with therapy, what are the signs that someone's really starting to process trauma and might actually be ready to move on or do more in-depth work?
I think I noticed that a lot in the way that they're describing how they're interacting with life.
Yeah.
So that's the real shift that I see, the way that they're interacting, whether it's with friends, family members, their community, just within themselves. That's when you really start to see the shift of, you see kind of a lightness comes back in them. And that's when you really start to see that they're kind of coming back to themselves. That's why I find therapy is, it's rediscovering yourself and being confident in that again. So that's what I tend to see is a big shift in seeing that stuff's being processed. I'm not sure about you, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a psycho-educational tool that I use, and I know that a lot of my colleagues use called the window of tolerance.
Okay, yeah.
And basically, what that means is the window of tolerance is a space that you exist in where you're able to think and feel at the same time. When you're outside of that window of tolerance, you're either in a hyperactivated or hypoactivated state. And it's difficult, and you become overwhelmed often, whether it's in a freeze response or whether it's in a fight response. And then when in that experience, it's then hard to really have a reflective capacity and think about what's happening for you. You're kind of in it, and you're taken by that experience. So when I think about the window of tolerance, it might be something that I talk about with a client. There can be worksheets or visual aids to do that. But I'm also thinking to myself, are they able to exist in that space? And if they're able to remember and feel difficult feelings, but also be able to think and communicate about them at the same time, then that for me indicates they're at a space to process more their trauma.
Yeah.
And I just want to link it back to something you said a moment ago that I think is important around that pivoting that happens between phase 2, remembering, storytelling, and then going back to stabilization techniques. There's an author and psychotherapist called Babette Rothschild.
Yeah.
And she uses a really good metaphor that I use a lot with my clients around taking a fizzy bottle of Coca-Cola. And if you shake it up, and then you only drink from it and you take the top off too quickly, it just goes everywhere.
Yes.
So trauma's a bit like a fizzy bottle of Coca-Cola. It's all fizzed up, there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So if you want to drink from that bottle, you
crack the lid a bit.
You crack the lid a little bit, let a little bit of gas out, and then you tighten it again before it explodes everywhere. And you continue that process until all the gas is released before you can drink from the bottle. So that's a really good metaphor for working between phase 1 and phase 2. That you let a bit, you use some stabilizing techniques to let a little bit of gas out, and then you go back to the storytelling. And when it gets a little bit overwhelming, or back to the processing and it gets a little bit too much, then you go back and you tighten the lid a little bit. And you kind of pivot back between those two phases, for want of a better way of saying it, until the client is able to be in that window, fully in that window of tolerance, where if the top comes off, the juice stays in the bottle.
Brilliant.
And you're not having to mop up afterwards.
No, I really, really like that.
It's a great metaphor for how therapy works, actually.
That is dead useful. I'm taking that. It's much better than one I've currently got. When it comes to, I don't want to stay on this particular language metaphor of mopping up the juice for too long, but when it comes to working with a client and helping them kind of bring that stability back in, maybe try and contain the session, are there steps that you feel like you need to take as therapists in order to protect yourself? If you're in that space and a lot of traumatic experiences are being washed at you, and our clients, have been through some of the more difficult experiences that anyone can go through is there work that you do in your own time to kind of protect your own capacity, protect against burnout and things like that?
I think probably the greatest thing about working at We Are Survivors is we're a team. We're a team of therapists. We all get to sit together, and you've always got somebody who's got your back. So you've got somebody who's doing exactly the same work with you. It's with different clients, and every client relationship you have is completely unique.
Of course,
but I think for me, the camaraderie and being in a team is what gets you through a difficult day, and what gets you through a hard day, what gets you through that was a really difficult session, is having other therapists that you can lean on but know exactly what you're doing. That for me is the biggest thing. I think that makes the difference.
Yeah, I suppose that's different. A lot of therapists would work, and many of us here do have private practice as well, but then having others to lean on and having that more collegial relationship seems really strong. I've always said a difficult day here is like getting a paper cut at the Band-Aid factory, because you're only 10 metres away from a therapist or someone who can support you at the worst of times.
Another great metaphor. And I think another great part of being here is obviously we've got the community development team, we've got the ISVA team, we're all sitting together, and we will all know clients in different capacities. So obviously that again puts a hug around you as the practitioner, but also the client in terms of the way that we all work together to support them.
Yeah. And what about yourself, Mark? How do you sort of prevent burnout yourself?
Well, a lot of what Jane just mentioned. I mean, I think from my kind of always my first response is supervision, and how important that is. Now here at We Are Survivors, all of the therapy team, in fact, all of the staff have access to 90 minutes of supervision a month, which is free, which I think is super helpful. I think it's great that the organisation offer that, and I think it's really needed. As a private therapist, I've also got my private clinical supervisor as well.
And what does that kind of clinical supervision look like?
So clinical supervision is sitting down either online or in a room with someone who has a lot of experience working with clients, someone who has a lot of knowledge, particularly around the clients that we work with here at We Are Survivors, and someone who's trained as a supervisor. So there's a whole process of training that's separate to the training that you would go through to become a therapist.
So they understand how to coach people.
They understand they've got a lot of knowledge around safeguarding issues. They've got a lot of knowledge around how to support therapists' well-being, how to support them in the interventions that they're making, how to think systemically around what's happening in the therapy room.
Brilliant.
So it's a real space to kind of, for us as therapists, to reflect, to grapple with the work that we're doing, to deepen our awareness and our knowledge of the work that's happening with our clients.
We also provide casual sort of peer supervision within the organisation as well. So that's working with the strengths that we have as a team already in a sort of a confidential space as well.
We run supervision groups, so peer-led supervision groups, supervision for different teams within the organisation. Again, that's another, it's not so much clinical, what I would call clinical supervision, but there's another level of supervision that's around supporting us as colleagues, as teams, giving a space to reflect, share. I don't know about you, but I often think when I have a problem or something isn't working, it's only me that experiences that.
Right.
So it's really
just challenging that.
Absolutely. It's about my colleagues are also grappling with this as well. Can be really useful. And there's another level I want to say. Maybe this is kind of blowing myself and Jane's trumpet a little bit, but we've been running workshops around important issues around class.
Yes, of course, you make quite a team,
and then recently ran a workshop around identity called Who Am I? And for me, these workshops are not only important around supporting us to work with the clients in terms of looking at complex issues around social class, structures of discrimination, identity, and the complexity and messiness of that. It also gives the team an opportunity, it gives the organisation an opportunity to get to know itself better. And this is also plays a big part in how we deal with the day-to-day content, if that's the right word, of trauma, or the day-to-day experiences of trauma we experience working with our clients. How do we support each other? So building that cohesion within the team through different ways is one way of supporting ourselves and building that resilience in the work that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about that sort of that day-to-day strategizing, is it things like routine that keep you, the same sort of things you might encourage clients to do? Is that the sort of stuff you practice yourself?
Definitely. I think when you think about therapists and burnout, like the biggest tool you have as a therapist in your role is yourself.
Yeah.
So looking after yourself is paramount. And like you said, mirroring, you're supporting a client with their looking after themselves. You've got to be doing it well yourself. So I know for me, I like to run a couple of times a week. That's a really important way for me to process emotions and work through things that are happening in my head. Again, that's something I would encourage clients to do if that's something that they have a space to kind of meditate and work through some of the stuff that's coming up in sessions. Another thing that I do when I'm feeling a bit stressed or a bit burnt out is reconnect with my inner child. That's a really important thing that I also discuss with clients. What did you like doing when you were a child? Was it painting? Was it singing? Was it dancing? So when I feel myself feeling like, you know what, I'm a bit overwhelmed, even though I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm going to go and play my piano for half an hour just to reconnect with myself. So that's a really important part of understanding who you are and how you're showing up in the therapy room. Because if you're not well as a therapist, you're not going to be well in the work that you're doing. So it kind of mirrors the experience that and the stabilization you're creating for your client. And
it's very interesting. I might ask you a question about it in a minute, but you can mirror kind of connecting with that inner child and accessing the parts of your brain that are childlike and want to do childlike things, even if you don't necessarily have a nice childhood to fall back on, which is very common for our clients. But it's very interesting. It's not just behaviors and hobbies that I've noticed. This sort of came up in my safe room last night, so it's something we explored together. My usual method of decompression is washing the dishes, which is a fantastically useful trait, let me tell you.
I love it.
But I also realized, looking back on some old photos of myself as a very young baby, the way I'd always hold my hands in photos, and I appreciate that not everyone has the visual benefit of this podcast, is I would slip my thumb between my first and my second finger and make a kind of a little fist like that. So all these photos of me as a child, I've got my thumb like this. And if I still do this now, I feel an immense sense of calm, which I feel at this very moment sort of just wash over me. So it's really, really interesting, that ability to pull you back into a nice, safe place. I might just ask you a little question about that inner child. So what do you describe the inner child as, if just in sort of layman's terms?
Great question.
So there is a mode of therapy called inner child work.
Yeah.
I haven't studied it, so I don't practice it, but what I know of it is this idea that that we still hold parts of us that are kind of almost childlike.
Yeah.
You know, we talked earlier about what a trauma-informed approach is. So one way of thinking about trauma is that when something shocking happens or something traumatic happens, there's a split that happens. It's like an adaptation that you could say your nervous system initiates or your brain initiates to try and protect you from that experience. So one part of you holds on to the trauma and another part of you is then able to get on with life in the best possible. And
so it's like when there's a fire in a forest, they'll clear a sort of a set of trees between the part that's on fire and the rest of the forest to try and stop the fire from spreading. You know, you create kind of a void.
That's a great way of thinking about it, George.
Isolation.
Yeah. So one way of thinking about that part that holds on to the trauma, especially if that trauma was something that happened in childhood, that there's almost like a younger part of you that stays with that experience while the rest of you kind of gets on with everyday life.
Yeah.
So working with that inner child can be one way of thinking about working with specifically with that part of you that has a younger experience still and holds on to those traumatic events.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Jane? Is that sort of your understanding of it?
Yeah, I would agree with the split, that analogy and metaphor that you've just created.
Yeah.
It's about reconnecting with that. And when I'm working with the inner child with people, it's reconnecting with kind of, no matter how difficult your childhood was, there was a joyful version of you that existed at some point, that carefree, innocent version. And it's reconnecting with that brings a bit more of your spark back.
Yeah.
And that's what I aim to do when I'm doing inner child work with people. And that's why it kind of focuses on stuff like, what did you enjoy doing when you were a child? And some people are like, I didn't enjoy anything.
Right.
But sometimes I just enjoyed reading books. Oh, so you liked learning. So curiosity might be the thing that we need to tap into when you're feeling that disconnect from self. So it's not always stuff like drawing, dancing. It can be, I liked learning. I liked being on my own. So that's another sign of, okay, what do you need to do to reconnect with yourself and ground yourself again?
And that's a kind of exploration that can take place in between sessions as well. When I'm thinking about what people sort of engage with in terms of their childhood, what they might have let go of and might need to reconnect with. It's always come around the language from No Bad Parts, which is the 8 C's, which is nothing to do with the 7 C's, no pirates involved, unfortunately. But it's words like curiosity and creativity. And I struggle to remember the rest, but there's a good list of them online. But it's the kind of thing you can sit down and think about and say, well, what are my values and what are the things that I'm maybe not expressing? And if you start to kind of play into these things a little bit more and allow yourself to be a bit more curious or feed that creative part of yourself.
It definitely does.
You can... That's the sense of self,
it
right?
Does. Yeah,
and that's what really feeds into your work.
And you're making me think of more C's, like compassion, cultivating. So when you think about the work we do at RHS, that would be a way of connecting with an inner
Our
child.
gardening sessions,
Yeah, because that would be, I'm using cultivation, I'm using compassion to create. So that would be another way that's exactly what you're talking about.
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic.
Can I add something to that?
Of course.
That kind of feeds into a kind of example of working with a client. I'll try and word it in a way that kind of doesn't break any kind of confidentiality.
Of course, yeah.
But I remember, as we're talking about this, I remember working with a client who already had a lot of resources, a lot of safety, had a lot of strong support networks, had already done a lot of processing around their trauma. But they came to the therapy sessions with a real hate and disgust towards their younger self.
Right.
The kind of younger self, because they were sexually abused as a child.
Sure.
And they blamed themselves for that experience and had a whole kind of vocabulary of words that were kind of critical towards themselves. And part of the work that we did was finding a way to kind of externalize that younger part and then develop a new relationship towards him and then reintegrate it back.
Okay.
And that was kind of really transformative for this client. So we used external objects initially to represent this young child that was hated.
Yeah.
And then develop a new relationship with him. And then we worked with that over several weeks.
So we're talking about external objects. Are you talking about holding a conversation with I don't know.
So I use different strategies around that. So sometimes if I haven't brought my little toolkit with me, I'll use whatever in the room. But sometimes I use stones. Or use other objects that can represent different aspects of the client. Because it might be so difficult to hold them inside of themselves.
So you want to get them out.
It kind of creates a distance. Just by doing that, you create distance between the client and the thing that's disturbing.
That's really interesting.
And then you've got space to work on it.
So if I find pebbles lying around in the therapy room, I know how to bring them back to it.
Yeah, I like to sometimes pick up pebbles and stones that I find on the beach. I like that.
Yeah.
And then I can use that. I like stones because not only do they have, because they're different shapes and sizes, they have that kind of different visual representation, but they have different textures as well. And they have different weights to them. So those different sensory experiences of that object can be really helpful for different clients.
No, that's really, really interesting. So for the next segment of our show, we like to pull into news and current affairs. Today, I'm actually looking at an article which is regarding the NHS's new 10-year mental health plan. This article is from Oberterio and Yao. It's for the Centre of Mental Health website. And it focuses on the sort of 6 or 7 new priorities for this new budget. But in particular, the data here is quite concerning in terms of maybe long-term expenditures and the rise in the need for mental health services. It's good that they're available, but about the long-term planning required to keep them available. So it says that in 2023 and 2024, there were 1.82 million referrals to the NHS Talking Therapy Service. That's more than double the figure for 10 years previous in 2012. And in 21-22, there was a total cost of £596.8 million reported by 47 providers of the NHS Talking Therapies, and that produced about 4.7 million appointments. So it's high price to sort of deliver these kinds of sessions. A particular other priority as well has been focusing on mental health support for young people, and this really feeds into the kind of work we do, given that I'd say the average client we work with usually faces childhood trauma. And that's describing that around 50% of the mental health problems that are established by the time a child reaches the age of 14, then develop into sort of longer term problems. And 75% of all mental health problems, which I don't, not enthused by the language on that, but mental health conditions, 75% of them arise or amount to a situation that occurred by the time someone turns 24. So a lot of it is ingrained from quite young on. Something that's also that comes up during the article as well is that it's currently an overused solution, particularly for young people and also for individuals from an older age. So that those sort of the more extreme ends of the scale when you're looking at people's lifespans, that they will sort of be put in hospital or sectioned as part of treatment rather than going through long-term mental health services. Of course, the NHS is a long waiting time. I'm curious to see what you think our own organisation can provide in terms of giving people some long-term stability and helping them rebuild, maybe outside of a hospital or outside of their NHS waiting list.
Yeah, definitely. I think anyone who comes to Survivors, their journey is different. You go through the referral, you go through the assessment, and then the next steps isn't always straight into therapy. It could be, actually, I'm going to dip my toe into some of the community development activities. And then work towards therapy. And then you have that space to go back to, so you're still connected to the organisation in terms of what we offer in terms of the community development team, that you can finish therapy, do that for a bit, or you can come back into therapy when, I don't know, something else might happen in life that might poke on what you covered in your first round of therapy. So I just feel like the journey is very open and smooth for people to come in and out. But something that I definitely do when I'm coming towards the end of therapy with clients is really reflect on who they want to be and what they want to be next in terms of their network and support system. I've seen people really begin to shift their lives and grow confidence outside of the therapy room, whether that's I'm going to start getting involved in this, I'm going to start showing up for this relationship or friendship more. So kind of seeing that gives me really good indicators of how they're taking control of the support network around them, with that acknowledgement that, okay, therapy's coming to an end. How do I continue to grow in this space and be supported in my life when the therapy's finished, for example?
And so that's about, if they've got a sort of a sense of drive that's been built up during the therapy, how do you use that to find the next thing or look for the next opportunity? And maybe that is they move back into the organisation and they do more work down the line, get the rest of the fizzy drink out. What about yourself, Mark? What would you say about sort of building long-term resilience through therapy?
I mean, I think you said it, Jane. I think maybe I'll just be repeating you when I work with the client, I'm thinking about how they can take what they're learning in the room out into their life. So it's really, I guess, the ultimate goal for a therapist is to become redundant.
100%.
And there's different ways to think about that in terms of, it could be stabilization or exercises or mindfulness exercises to kind of create that sense of safety or calm, or it can be developing the capacity to self-reflect. Now, you might think that comes as a natural way of being for most people, but I know personally that it wasn't until later life that I developed that capacity in a way that really helped me to kind of understand myself. So a big part of therapy work is supporting clients to have that kind of meta view of themselves, to be able to think about their thinking, again, to be able to think and feel at the same time and notice that that's what they're doing. So it's about really creating that way of living so that they can take it out of the therapy.
And I think it's something about the sort of the continued level of support, because you might only be in a room with someone for an hour each week or on the phone with them for an hour each week. And some of our clients have fantastic support. They have incredible spouses, incredible children, incredible friends, but not all of them do. The only key and underpinning factor between anyone we work with is the only person who will always be in their lives ready to support them every single hour of the day is themselves. So if you can really give them the tools and the language they need to have an internal conversation, or when they don't feel ready to get themselves down the mountain, so to speak, in that calm space, is themselves.
100%.
And it's a good, what you're saying kind of feeds into what myself and Jane were talking about in terms of that phase 3 approach. The kind of anchoring, re-emerging back into the community with those tools that you've developed through the kind of phase 1 stabilization, creating safety, phase 2 being able to kind of bring a sense of understanding and kind of retelling and mourning to the traumatic experiences, anchoring those kind of tools and new ways of thinking and new perspectives, and then going back out into the world.
Yeah.
So that's kind of part of the therapeutic process as well.
It is. It's like the magic of therapy is watching someone just to begin to show up for themselves and advocate for themselves.
I like that.
Even just within their own world.
Yeah.
And whether that's just, I'm doing this for me today, I'm going to go on a walk today, or I'm going to do this, whatever it is, journaling, or just nothing. Sometimes it's just, I'm going to do nothing today. And that is such a shift from the person that walked into the first session.
Yeah.
So the bonus is it shows up in different relationships, in your job, in kind of your hobbies and your friendships. But actually the biggest and most moving thing you see through therapy work is someone beginning to show up for themselves.
So it's a real classic when you're working with survivors, the sort of the underpinnings of shame and guilt and blame that keep survivors silent and protect perpetrators, but also can keep people imprisoned within themselves because they can believe in the same way as society might judge someone for parking the car on a wrong street and say, well, if they'd been perfect, if they'd been a perfect individual, they would have put their car somewhere else and it wouldn't have happened to them. Survivors can internalize this logic about themselves, even if it's utterly unfair. And so if they believe this whole time that they're not perfect and that they're in any way to blame for their experiences, or their experiences have damaged them in such a way that they shouldn't inflict themselves on other people, seeing that kind of switch around where someone steps up to really advocate for themselves. I'm doing this for me. I'm having my favorite food today because I'm worth it.
It's a great one to do. I'm having my favourite food today because I'm worth it.
Yeah.
I think this is for me as a therapist, this is kind of often a tricky spot, because if I say to a client, look, I really notice how much strength and resilience you have around being able to survive what happened to you. It kind of can land, but it often doesn't. But supporting them to come to that conclusion by themselves is really the kind of skill, the kind of skill that's needed within that therapeutic kind of process. And what I do notice that when someone as we grapple with this together, comes to the conclusion that something like, what happened to me wasn't okay, but I'm really strong and powerful to have survived that, and being able to really feel that in an embodied way, that's where the resilience comes in terms of like how they get on with the rest of their life. And how you do that, how that emerges in therapy is different for everybody.
Yeah, it's really personalised.
But there's something very magical about it that when you see a client find that kind of on their own, but with support from yourself, then it's like boom. That's when, even when I talk about it now, I can feel like
I can feel that pride.
Or there's just something really moving and beautiful power about that. But it can be difficult to get there. Absolutely.
No, absolutely. Do you have Mark gave us a little story earlier about his own sort of successes working with a client and helping them find that way to bring the inner child back in. Do you have an example of your own sort of guiding of a client?
Probably. I finished with the client on Monday, actually, and what you were just talking about there, Mark, it was the same thing. I think the last thing I said to them was, I'm so proud of you. Because I was just so proud of the progress that they made. I mean, it was difficult. The journey was bumpy.
Sure.
There was points where it was like, it didn't feel like it was going to get better. It felt like the trauma was winning.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, I don't know how to describe it. I don't know if this happens with you, Mark. Everything just suddenly drops into place, and just different parts of their life began flourishing, and I began to really see them emerge. It was like a little rebirth that happened. And I was so proud of them, because the reason that happened was because they showed up every week and gave space to really difficult emotions. And like I said, retelling the story and going through that together allowed them to kind of give birth to a new version of themselves, which was really, really beautiful. And I'm so proud of you.
Oh, bless.
And I'm so excited for what's going to happen next for them the rest of this year. We were talking about, so what are you going to do this summer? And all of these things and opportunities that felt so out of reach are now suddenly...
They don't have to just look backwards or look at day-to-day survival. They can start looking forwards and actually getting genuinely excited about things. And that's really special. Well, fantastic.
I'm very proud. Being proud is great.
That's part of the magic in therapy, is to have that kind of intense space where someone can reflect back something to you as a client that for whatever reason you just don't notice. And I guess often people will turn up with a lot of resilience already. They'll already turn up with a lot of strength. They'll already turn up with a lot of capacity. That's probably what brought them to the room in the first place. But they just don't know it. They're experiencing themselves as someone who's really struggling, and that's true. But they're also someone who's got a lot of ability to kind of support themselves, and being able to point that out can be really helpful.
Yeah, you're making me think of a part of the role of a therapist is connecting dots. So a lot of the work that we do is, okay, trauma happened here, and I'm upset about this thing that happened today in work or with my partner.
You're drawing a correlation.
You connect the dots with maybe the reason this is happening or you're showing up in this space is because of the feelings connected to this. And
it's that word noticing that's come up a few times. Yeah.
And working with that, and that's working with the trauma, then allows how they're showing up in today, in the present moment, to be different, and then the future. So I feel like it's a lot of connecting the dots. I tell a lot of my clients, they come in and they're like, I just feel like I just word vomit at you. And I'm like, but I'm attaching all the strings in the background, and suddenly it all makes sense.
Yeah, you keep putting post-it notes on the wall.
Yeah.
We'll put the string between them, and that'll be that.
Yeah, you get these little golden moments where suddenly everything comes together.
And what people choose to reveal, even if it seems unstructured, is going to have some kind of meaning.
Yeah.
Where they are, what this room makes them think about, what they're inherently connecting to their trauma, because they're in a service that deals with trauma and they feel the need to talk about this. There's probably a line there. Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, thank you. That's a really fascinating breakdown and description of it. So our next section is the activity spotlight. Today, we're going to highlight one of our amazing initiatives. And there's no better person to bring this up to than Mark, who is spearheading it for us. It's group therapy. So we've obviously been talking about individual therapy, so the one-to-one sessions. And in the past here, we've talked about our safe rooms, which are led by members of my team. They're much more a peer support space based on the classic structures of drug and alcohol services. So what is group therapy? How is it a bit different?
Yeah, good question. I was thinking about it, during the conversation that we've been having when myself and Jane have been talking about how important it is for clients who maybe don't identify with their strengths or with their capacity, and how as therapists we can reflect that back, and it can be really helpful.
Yeah.
When that happens in a group environment, it's almost like it's amplified. It's like it's an amazing thing to experience where a group start to reflect back the what they see in another person. It kind of lands in a way. Sometimes clients will be like, oh, you're only saying that because you're a therapist, or that's what your job is. But when it happens in a group with a fellow survivor, for example, it kind of goes in a way that's different from how I might be able to initiate that response in someone. So that's just one example. I was thinking of that as we were talking just now about the magic of group therapy.
Therapists, I guess, even if you hold a really neutral space, there's a kind of an authority, right? There's maybe could be a power imbalance in therapy, something you'd really want to not make a thing out of, but a client might go in and maybe they've had clinical experiences in the past, and maybe they feel like you're an expert, and they might push back a little bit. A lot of survivors have very natural and understandable problems with authority, maybe from their own experiences, maybe just from their lives.
I think so. There's a power dynamic. I also want to say that it's not a neutral. Therapy is not a neutral space. Okay. It's anything but actually. The complexity of two human beings and being in a room together.
So we can get quite
it's there, and it's really important for us to ethically to. There's two roles as a therapist and the client, and there's a power dynamic there, and there's a perception from the client towards me, and it can
the hats can't switch around.
So and that somehow that changes in a group environment. I guess that's what I want to say, that there's like I'm here with other people that have had similar experiences. They get what happened to me, even though everybody's experiences are unique. And when someone tells me, I see your strength, or I believe in you, the impact of that has a different quality or different texture to it that I've noticed than one-to-one therapy.
And there's something as well about certainly with our safe rooms, I imagine it's a similar dynamic. I've sat in on group therapy sessions before, and it's something I feel like I noticed, which is that one of the most powerful things that can happen in a group space is someone can say something in their voice that feels like a conversation that's maybe going on in your head, and suddenly every other survivor, every other person in that room is like a mirror, and you get a chance to see qualities in yourself play out from that third perspective. We don't always take notice of how we sit and might move our feet around or our posture or the expressions on our face, but when you see someone else doing their own introspection, you get a real interesting window. In terms of our group therapy, Is that something that is being sort of test piloted at the moment? Is it open to everyone? What's the waiting list? If I was joining now, would I be able to walk in, or would I be expecting a bit of a... Yeah.
So the group, we're almost halfway through the first group therapy program. So
Brilliant.
it's a 15-week program.
Yep.
At the moment, it's on Saturdays, and it's on for 2 hours.
Yep.
So it's a pilot group, and we're going to. I guess after we come to the end of that, or towards the end of that, we'll be thinking about how we might start to build on what's
gauge it and advertise it more.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how things will play out in terms of the organisation, but for me personally, I would like to see group therapy being offered here at our main hub, and also eventually at the new spoke sites that we're setting up around
our
the Greater
remote
Manchester
sites
area.
outside of Great Manchester.
I think, judging by the feedback already, I think it's a really important addition to the therapy programs that we already offer. I think there's a lot of clinical evidence to suggest that group therapy is just as effective as one-to-one therapy. For some people, it'll be more effective. And it also, I don't know, I guess it also helps us create that. It also helps our clients. It has a different, how do I want to say this? I guess it also supports that sense of loneliness that can be around with trauma, that sense that you're the only one that really has had this experience.
It challenges that
isolation,
that voice that says no one else will understand you.
Yeah.
So
there's already within the group there's community being built.
Brilliant.
And it's already spreading outside of the group as well. Those support networks are already happening. So that's the kind of magic of
it's an added bonus, definitely.
So I would like to see that being it's a pilot scheme, but I'd like to see that being expanded over the course of the next, I don't know, short to mid-term in terms of the type of support that we offer.
Well, touch wood, and if that certainly becomes an offering, we'll mention it here on the podcast and start to spread the good word. But
can I just say one thing as well?
Of course.
I mean, I guess I could talk about this for a little bit longer. But one of the things that surprised me has been the appetite for the group therapy. When we first started to set up the kind of pilot scheme, I was a bit like, people see group therapy being portrayed on movies and TV, and it's got
such a reputation,
skewed in a particular way. And but when we started to call up clients on the waiting list and say, look, we're offering this pilot, this group, the feedback has been really positive. Like there is an appetite for this kind of support, for this kind of therapy intervention. And it's been really amazing to kind of be part of that and to experience that.
Well, that's really exciting. Long may it continue.
And change the narrative on it, because I think you're right. The media and films and movies and books portray therapy, whether it's group therapy or just therapy in general, as a specific thing, and it's actually not. It's one of the first things I say in a first session, like this isn't going to be like the movies.
You still see people lying down on the couch, don't you, in movies, while the therapist sits in the corner.
And that's really important to demystify and be like, it's not like that. This is us in a room having a relationship.
I'm watching an Australian TV show at the moment. I was watching it this morning with group therapy, and there's a guy in the room who's got our haircut, Mark, and he's talking, and he's got his hands wide, and how does that make you feel? So here's to changing the narrative on group therapy.
Changing the narrative, for
absolutely,
sure.
Absolutely. I think it's another thing that we're doing here at We Are Survivors. We were really kind of continuing to kind of evolve and push boundaries and create new narratives. Absolutely.
No, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, like I said, long may it continue. And if there is any future development on it, if it becomes a wider and more open program, well, of course, we'll get the word out and start to canvass for more support.
Absolutely.
I'm moving in now into our final segment of the podcast. It's the letters section, and we have a absolutely delightful letter here today that I think would be a real pleasure to read out. It's a real celebration of everything we've been talking about today. There was a mention at the start about when people first refer in, often they're referred in by a supporter, and that was the situation in this client's case. And it's an exploration of his journey and his experiences with therapy here as well. And it goes like this. Hey guys, I just wanted to say it felt hopeless to find any place that helps men with experiences of sexual abuse. I started working with you guys last year when my girlfriend found you guys. I just wanted to say it's an absolute pleasure working with all of you. I kept my silence for 20 plus years, and you guys are all amazing with listening to me and my story. I started to attend the drop-ins recently, and you were all so welcoming. It's an amazing experience. I can't wait to spend my healing journey with you guys' help. And to anybody watching this, when you are ready, these guys are amazing and ready to help you. I would not choose anywhere else to do my therapy. You are all amazing.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
It's just so sweet.
Yeah, that's so great.
It's really kind. I think we meet some of the most amazing and interesting people out there. There's no one picture of what a survivor looks like. There's no portrait. All walks of life, all ages, all ethnicities. It's just really special, and it's nice. It's been nice to have a celebration of that most crucial bit of work, the real crux of the organisation, which is therapy. You know, it's the heart of what we deliver. As part of the community, a major part of our role is to support people to get ready for therapy, and also give them connections with other survivors once they've done that processing, if they're ready. With the ISVA service, we rely a lot on therapists to help clients find the confidence to speak their truth, you know, to use the power of therapy to get their words out there. So, yeah, I just wanted to celebrate and thank you for your work and what you do.
Thank you.
Thanks,
George. Yeah.
As we move now to the end of the show, I wanted to thank you all for listening to another episode of Beyond the Silence. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting. Glad to have you back for season 2. As we start to come to a close, I'd like to ask my guests one final question, which is, to any survivors or supporters out there who might be listening, what would your sort of final word be? What would be the one thing you'd want to say to them today?
I think I would say, we're here to hear your story. Full stop.
Yeah, brilliant. What about yourself, Mark?
You know, in the 3.5 years that I've been here, the organisation has really grown and expanded. Our approach and new and exciting ways that we're using to support and reach people is ever growing and ever expanding. And I think there's a reason for that, because we do such a good job. And I think if you want to get in touch, we're definitely here for you, and we can definitely support you. And how quickly or how fast you want that relationship to grow is entirely up to you. But pick up the phone and give us a call.
Well, thank you again to Mark and Jane for their time on the podcast today, and thank you for listening and joining us again for season 2. If you want to find us on social media, the best way to look for us is via @ThisIsSurvivor. You can find us on all forms of social media, good and bad. The best way to get involved with the show, maybe you want to send in a letter, maybe you've got an article you'd like us to talk about, is via the hashtag #BreakTheSilence or the hashtag #WeAreSurvivors. Of course, if you want to learn anything more about the material we looked through today, the article will be in the description, so please do look there. You can also find this podcast available in a video format if you are listening on a traditional streaming site, so you can find that on YouTube, or vice versa, however you want to stay in touch in the future. So, lastly, to all survivors out there, from our safe space to yours, thank you and goodbye.